This is going to be a very interesting session with three very, very knowledgeable and privileged to have them here in our office to talk about this great new book. Amazon is out of stock. It's on order. Peter didn't even know that. A friend of mine tried to order it the other day, and they said no, it's out of stock, and it's a good thing. So nice. I'm not doing this because I can pay. It's the truth. I thought you pardon my back because there are people behind me. So this is an important work and very important subject for the American labor movement and for the United States and for the world. How is power accumulated? How is power used? How does the labor movement become more powerful? What does it need to do? What hasn't it done? These are some of the subjects that are very well addressed in this book by John Womack, a very important historian and sociologist at Harvard. And he wrote Peter's going to talk about it. I won't take your steam, but he is I know his work from Latin American studies that I did on Mexico. We're going to have three presentations, talks, one by Mr. Olney, one by Ms. Shetler, and one by Gene Bruskin. And I'll introduce them, then I'm going to make some parting remarks, and then we'll have questions from the audience. And I hope you will chime in and give strong, pointed questions, because this is a difficult and sensitive, but a very important subject. I think we'll all agree. Peter Olney, who I've had the privilege of knowing in the last, 8 or 9 years, something like that, is the retired director and organizing for the International Shoremen and Warehouse Union. It's Longshore, not Longshoremen. Longshore. That's right, to be corrected. One of the most important unions in American history, frankly. He was Associate Director of the University of California's Institute for Labor and Employment. He resides in San Francisco, teaches building trades union organizers, a very difficult thing to do. As a member of the faculty of the Building Trades Academy at Michigan State University, he is the editor of the Stansberry Forum, and he's also one of the editors of this book, and did the interviews with Mr. Womack. Second will be Melissa Shetler, who I have the pleasure again, an honor of knowing, who's a woman with tremendous courage and conviction to work as she has, and don't bring me to tears, right? Because it does. The difficulties of working in the building trade as a woman and trying to become a leader of that organization is something that's heroic. It's not something you suffer maybe frontally, but you suffer in all kinds of ways in taking on that task. And she's done it. She's earned the respect of the men she's worked with, respect of the workers she's worked with. So we have the privilege of having her here tonight to talk to us. She is the works with the Climate Jobs National Resource Center and Cornell University Labor Leading on Climate Initiative. She is co-founder and former executive director of Pathways to Apprenticeship, one of the most important programs the building trades has done in the last 50 years in this city. One of the founders of that, I stress that, a pre-apprenticeship program that assists historically marginalized communities gain access to union construction jobs. How important is that? Union construction careers. She worked as a community organizer and member of educator facilitator with the Labor's Eastern Regional Organizing Fund, a very tough union, and became the director of organizing. And later, political director for the Metallic Lab, and this is where I got to know it, director of the Metallic Lab and Reinforcing Iron Workers Local 46. Book has a mistake. It says 36, and it's not 36, it's 46.
Oh, damn right.
Damn right. I know that. And finally, and not least of all, is a fantastic person in the labor movement has had the honor of working for and with is Gene Bruskin, who I got the honor of meeting him tonight, has been active for 40 years, and I'm the only one that does that. I'm 50 years. I'm done. In the labor movement as local union president, organizer, and campaign coordinator for local and national unions. One of the most important corporate campaigns and strategic campaigns in the last 40 years, Gene has been involved with, if not led. From 1992 and 94, he served as labor deputy for Jesse Jackson National Labor Coalition. He was Secretary Treasurer of the Food and Allied. He was Secretary Treasurer for the Food and Allied Service, AFL-CIO Union, from 1996 to 2005. He was with the UFCW campaign director, Justice at Smithfield, one of the most important, again, campaigns in the last 40 years, 50. In North Carolina, 2006 to 2008, established the Strategic Campaign Department of the American Federation of Teachers, a union which badly needed a campaign department. From 2009 to 12, he co-founded U.S. Labor Against the War. And to me, that's one of the most important parts of his biography or resume. He took a stand like Jack Shankman did. We're talking about Jack Shankman, one of the most important labor leaders in the United States in the last 50 years. Took a stand on American foreign policy, which was against the grain, completely against it, against the interests of the American corporations, and has been active in other international labor solidarity efforts, including supporting independent union organizations. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have a book, which is a polemic. I'm sure you're going to use that term, which is exciting the labor movement. Young people are learning from it. So we're interested in hearing your reflections on this book and your contribution to it. Peter?
First of all, thanks to Mike Locker and Bob Howlett for hosting us here at Locker Associates. Mike's been crucial to my entry into doing some of this teaching in the building trades. Certainly my entry into working with Steve Perez and others from Local 46 in Queens. That's where I met Melissa Shetler, working at that local. So it's good to be here. I have people in the room who might go back 50 years. Here we go.
There we go.
Anyways, so if you can stop obsessing about the Chinese spy film, and don't worry about Kyrie Irving going off. He's off to the Dallas Mavericks. Right? But if you're not paying attention to that, it would behoove you maybe to pay attention to France and some of the mass protests and strategic strikes that have taken place, protesting the increase in the pension age from 62 to 64. These are strategic strikes at key nodes in the economy. Railroads, high-speed railroads, and the metro in Paris have had tremendous impact in fueling these mass protests. These are political strikes. In my experience, Mike mentioned I was the organizing director of the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, the West Coast Dockworkers Union. We represent 29 ports from Vancouver, British Columbia to San Diego. I had the occasion many times to see the exercise of working class power at key strategic nodes in the economy. And I'll give you a short story to illustrate that. In 2000, we succeeded in organizing a group of 140 workers who worked in an export processing facility in the port of Los Angeles. It's called LAXT, LA Export. They were processing coke and coal for export, mainly to Japan, used in coke ovens and making steel. The product was delivered by a conveyor belt from the facility to the docks, where our members in the Longshore Union loaded the ships with the coke and coal. We started negotiating with this company. They hired a union-busting attorney from Jackson Lewis, the company that those who have been in the trenches in labor have heard of. They were hired as a hired gun to smash organizing efforts. They negotiated with us for about 10 months, hoping to run out the clock on the year certification, decertified union. We went out on strike in 10 months, shut down within 24 hours, shut down this whole terminal, export terminal, so that product was not moving from this company, nor was product moving from any other company. And within 48 hours, the company's attorney, who had been lording it over me for 10 months, came to me and said, Peter, you got to give me something for my client. And those of you who've done labor negotiations know the exhilaration and feeling that you get that, because he needed something symbolic to justify his role in billing them thousands of dollars every time. We had succeeded in winning basically a doubling of the wages and obviously some very good new benefits. We'd gotten everything we had asked for, and he needed something symbolic. Well, we didn't get it because I was a brilliant negotiator. We had a very strong committee. We had worker solidarity. We got it because we interrupted the flow of commerce and shut down a keynote in international commerce. So that really brought home this lesson that Womack talks about. And soon after that incident, I wrote a paper called The Arithmetic of Decline, a Modest Proposal for Renewal. It was published by New Labor Forum, a journal here in New York. Many of you have read it, probably many of you have written from it. And I wrote this article and I stressed the importance of labor maintaining a focus or capturing a focus on manufacturing and logistics. Manufacturing, arguing that this country remains a manufacturing power. There's still tons of manufacturing going on in this country, and we need to organize. Logistics, for the obvious reasons of my own experience with the power of workers in that sector. And of course, with Amazon now, we'll certainly be discussing that in the course of this conversation this evening. Well, I wrote this paper and I got an email from a professor, John Womack at Harvard University, who said, I read your paper, I found it very interesting, and he attached a 250-page academic paper that he had presented in Helsinki, Finland at a conference on the same topic of strategic workers and strategic power. And I thought, I know this guy's name because I read Zapata in the Mexican Revolution in the 70s. He's probably the most respected and well-known historian of the Mexican Revolution in the English language. So I was flattered. This guy wants to talk to me. Wow. I looked at his paper. His paper is one of those academic papers where the footnotes overpower the narrative. Space devoted to footnotes is like this narrative. But it was a brilliant paper. I loved the paper. Made a lot of great points, very insightful analysis. Soon after, the paper was published as a book in Mexico called Posición Estratégica y Fuerza Obrera, Strategic Position and Working Class Power. And it was published by the Mexican government. And I thought, after I retired from the ILWU, I thought, this person's thoughts on this topic need to be captured somehow. We need to get his thinking on this out to a broader audience. So I did some interviews with him at a restaurant in Somerville, Massachusetts called The Foundry. So we call these interviews The Foundry interviews. And John discusses all kinds of things in the interviews. He discusses what is the working class in the United States. He discusses these questions of strategic position of power. He discusses what was the experience of the Russian Revolution, these questions. He talks about a man named John Dunlop, who some of you of my vintage remember as Nixon's Secretary of Labor. But he was one of these New Deal guys that studied industries. And Womack studied a lot of what Dunlop had written about strategic power and strategic industry. So we had a wide-ranging interview, very interesting. But then my co-editor, Glenn Perusek, a very talented researcher and trainer, lives in Cleveland, Ohio. He said to me, let's get 10 of the best labor educators and organizers. We have 2 of them here tonight to respond to Womack. So we have these 10 folks responding to John's perspective, and then he responds to them, and then he writes an essay. Because the interview was done in 2018, and believe you me, 4 years have passed, a lot has happened. So that's kind of the origins of the book, and what I consider to be the importance of the book. Let me read just one paragraph from the book, which I think captures John's perspective, and then we can start into the discussion here with my co-panelists. So I want to argue hard that labor needs network analysis to see where its industrial and technical power is. It needs to know where the crucial industrial and technical connections are, the junctions, the intersections in space and time, to see how much workers can supply or transformation can interrupt, disrupt, where and when in their struggles they can stop the most capitalist expropriation of surplus value. That's his fundamental argument. We're going to elaborate on that. But I just want to add that this type of thinking and analysis is certainly not new in labor, certainly not new to the labor left. A man named William Z. Foster was a brilliant analyst of industries, the steel industry and other industries. I'll tell a final anecdote about a couple of folks that were into this kind of analysis. In 2005, I accompanied the leaders of the ILWU back to Washington, D.C. to meet with Hoffa Jr. at the Marble Palace to discuss jurisdictional issues. And we met with Hoffa Jr. And he said to us, right out of the chute, he said, you know, my father and your famed, legendary international president, Harry Bridges, were great friends. And a little surprising because, of course, one man was a red, the other was a racketeer. But they both had a strict and solid strategic acumen. They understood power, they understood nodes in the supply chain. And he said, I remember as a young boy watching Harry Bridges and Hoffa on the floor of my living room, moving phone books around to help each other understand the linkages in the logistics supply chain and the places that you could interrupt the flow of commerce and garnish working class power. So I'll stop there. Hoffa and Bridges, strange bedfellows, but both extremely sharp, strategic thinkers. So I think we're going to move on, and Melissa Shetler, I'm sort of interested in your respondent. So what was your reaction to reading Womack and these interviews of this whole book project?
Yeah, so I'll say a little bit about how I kind of landed in this world of labor, and it'll help inform what my response was. I didn't grow up in a labor household, but I did grow up on a commune in Vermont, and my parents were musicians and teenagers, and so I didn't know much about it. And my work really was in education, and I moved to New York to be a jazz singer and ran after-school programs, intergenerational oral history and the like, and started going back to college in my 30s at a SUNY institution for people who were older that hosted the Harry Van Arsdale Center. So I started to talk to electricians and get like all of a sudden I was like, oh, labor, like really it was that far behind for me. And I was studying theater for social change with Augusto Boal just before he passed, and sort of learning about how the embodiment of knowledge can help us transform society. And that carries into my work in the embodiment of knowledge in workers, which is very much actually tied to, I think, what Womack says. For all of this strategic analysis, it's really workers' knowledge that I think roots all of this. So that was the first thing that came to me was that response within myself of like, oh, wow, he's really talking about working from workers' knowledge. And then, I studied Paulo Freire and I read a lot of Miles Horton and then sort of began thinking more strategically and needed health insurance. And so I started working with the laborers. They needed a community organizer who spoke Spanish and would knock on doors in Brownsville. And I was that person. And did really broad campaigns that were community-based and really how do we get the community on our side? how do we push legislation that affects our industry, which was unionized building and construction trades, but also make sure that it affects communities. And I really learned that we needed to activate our members. So the building and construction trades is, and I've learned, over the years now, many other labor locals and unions, very top down and very bureaucratic. And the members look at it a lot as a service industry. Where's my job? And can you get me a job? And even when I was organizing, talking to folks about the union, it was, are you going to get me work? It wasn't so much organizing workplaces, right? Which is a very different approach. So I started educating members and joining the organizing education processes of different locals. And what I found was that we were doing exactly what capitalism wanted us to do, which was teaching us to sit still and take in the information and what Ferry calls the banking method and spitting it back out just right. So I spent 3 days being told how to listen. Well, nobody ever modeled listening, right? And we never had any opportunity to listen. So I wrote, and here, this will tell you a little about me in the building trades. It was like, it wasn't just a local, it was the Eastern region head. And I did the 3-day training and I was hired a few months and I wrote a long letter that was a complete analysis of their organizing trainings and how I thought they could reevaluate it, what they should do. I didn't get fired for that, but I didn't get listened to for 3 years. And 3 years later, I got a note saying, we'd like to restructure the ways in which we teach organizing, and would you like to come and help? So I went and started doing story circles with construction workers who were doing heavy highway work to share with each other the experience of having watched accidents at work. In order to inform the ways in which we talk about work, testify, and build public support, which is the associational power in some ways that comes up in Womack's book and how we build associational power. I think of as like, how do we just build community within our own locals? And then also really working broadly later with broader strategic analysis, working with folks like Locker and folks in this room who know a lot about this as well. The real estate industry is its own space. It's like some other spaces, but it's definitely unique also. And really, like, finance is the thing, right? Like, that's your choke point in many ways. And so that doesn't necessarily give you opportunity for worker activism. And so we really thought about how do you link those things. You really need the strategic analysis of good internal, like looking at the companies and really unpacking that information and tracking where the money is. But you also need somebody to go to those board meetings when those funds are meeting that says, I was the worker who the beam fell on my head and you're investing in this and it's a risk. And so making those links and really working with workers to be participating was the thing that I was most interested in Womack's work, which was like, and everybody's response in this book, I think, is great in that it's a yes and or a yes but. It's a broadening. And so that was mine. It was like, absolutely, but we've got to like reevaluate the ways in which we teach and talk about education and create participatory education that is not like this top-down banking method. And so that's my first sort of piece of entree.
Steve, how about you?
So good to see everybody. Got some friends visiting in the back here. Well, I thought it was when I saw this interview that Womack, who I've never met, I just felt like it's like really provocative. But he's saying something that everybody should do. Sometimes we talk about it, but when you're taking on a company, how do you really hurt them? And how do you hurt them in the most creative ways? Where are they vulnerable? Where are the points where if you extract or you stop that one point of work, even if everybody else tries to work, there's nothing else that anybody can do. And how do you do that between companies? And how do you do that between industries? And how do you think about taking power? Because the labor movement is afraid of having power. The labor movement is afraid of power. What if they get mad at us? What if the companies, we have a good relationship with that employer.
Right.
Why should we shut down that other place where the employer also has a place? Because we don't want to get him mad at us, He's talking about how do you really have power, not only in your workplace, in your industry. What if we really took that? What if the railroad workers called up the ILWU and got in a room with them and the Teamsters and said, well, let's see, the ILWU takes the product from China and then we put it into the trucks and onto the trains, and the trains go to the different places and put it onto the trucks and take it out there. What if we just had a conversation and our members just didn't do something for a couple of days until they passed labor law reform, healthcare reform, whatever? We would win. They couldn't fire us, right? So he really is challenging a big picture, but it also has an immediate application. And so, like Melissa said, everybody in here said absolutely, and so also, so like Bill Fletcher wrote a piece that among other things said, in this country you cannot ignore the relationship between race and class. Right? When you're doing whatever you're doing, wherever you're organizing, whatever your message is, whatever your employer is, it's fundamental from the first day that people they brought enslaved people to this country to the present. This issue has been like fundamental. And Jane McAlevey said, "This is great. Okay, all these key powers, industries, and manufacturing, and logistics, but when the teachers shut down the city of Los Angeles or the city of Chicago, and for 2 or 3 weeks, and the whole city is virtually paralyzed because all those parents don't go to work, and because there's a crisis in the education